I worked with various tradesmen, such as the pipe fitters, millwrights, electricians, and welders. Mostly with the millwrights, but sometimes with the other trades as a helper. You would report prior to 8 a.m. To the appropriate area on the platform, and the platform was down in the bottom of the hill, the mill, across from the mill garage and by the machine shop and that. And each trade had its own area along the platform. They called the platform because the Lokies used to run right along beside there, hauling the paper out of the old mill, out of 1 to 4 paper machines to the wharf. And so you'd go there and you'd gather there, and then the superintendent of that, millwright superintendent, pipe fitter superintendent, whoever it happened to be, they would come along and tell the tradesman, okay, your job today, I want you to go do here, you go there, and whoever you were assigned to, you were his helper, and you would have to carry his toolbox. And because the tradesmen, they didn't carry their toolbox unless they didn't have a helper, and it was your job. So you'd walk around with it on your shoulder like one of the guys, you know. Anyhow, I worked as a millwright helper, and we had jobs all over the mill, and it really helped me better understand the whole aspects of such a large operation, because at that time it was the biggest integrated pulp and paper mill in the world. And you know, it had 9 paper machines, a K-Mir machine, all that kind of stuff, sawmill, everything. So I recall one week, or a couple of weeks actually, be assigned to a millwright whose job was repairing the grinders in 1 and 2 grinder rooms. And so I worked with him for a couple of weeks. And his job was, they would shut down certain grinder or lines of grinders because they were all done, they were water-fed power from the turbines. They weren't electric, and they were powered by water, and they would just pull the clutch, and they would shut a set of pockets down. They called them pockets because the grinder had pockets all around 2 sides, and there was 6 pockets that a grinderman had to feed when he was on shift. So one of the jobs, well, his job was to take them apart, make sure everything is okay inside, clean up anything if it needed a new cylinder or whatever. So, and you had a small crane there, the overhead crane that you used to lift up stuff. But basically, after the second week, he would take off. I don't know, he'd bugger off somewhere and go for a walk somewhere. I'm going to the mill store, say, and he wouldn't come back for like an hour and a half. And I could basically tear down and put back together a pocket grinder, because they're very simple. They're not complicated pieces of machinery. And I thought that was kind of cool. And I didn't mind if he took off. So what? I got something to do. I worked a number of shifts in the beater room, stock preparation. One of the ones that was interesting, I worked on the lap machine. It was in the basement of the old beater room, stock prep by 1 to 4 paper machines. And it was like a miniature, I guess you would say, well, it was a pulp machine, but it would be like a miniature paper machine. And all it did was form big, thick sheets of pulp on a drum. And your job was to take a pointed stick. And when it got to there was a counter, like a counter that you would use. And as the drum went around, it would trigger the click, 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 and it would show how many thicknesses it was. And I don't remember how thick it got, but when it got to a certain size, your job was to take the sharp stick and run it right across the face of the drum. And the pulp then would be broken, and it would come onto a table, like a wooden table. I don't know, it'd be about 3 feet wide, I guess, in front of you. And your job was to fold the sheet, like fold it up, fold it in half, fold it in that. And then you would take it, and behind you would put it onto a skip. And when the skip got full, and they would take it. And what they did with the pulp was they would take it and put it into the beaters, what we call broke beaters and stock beaters, and break it up until it would come into pulp. I couldn't understand why you put it that way. Then you just broke it back into pulp again, but there was a reason for it. And I don't recall what it was. Maybe I knew at the time. And another couple of times and then you would do some general duties in the beater room, washing the floor and cleaning up and throwing the pulp laps into the beaters. You know, that was a separate job from making the laps. And I had a couple of graveyard shifts. I always remember this. Not very, I only had 1 or 2 of them underneath 1 and 2 paper machines in the basement, where the job was to lift and pull any of the waste paper, or broke as we called it, into the single broke beater, because there was only one broke beater in the basement of between 1 and 2 paper machines. And I always remember sitting there one night having my lunch on the bench, and it was warm there if you were against the wall, and there was the heat from the dryers. And I saw the biggest bloody rat I ever saw in my life. I swear it must have been 2 feet long, and that wasn't counting the tail. And it was walking across, and it looked at me, and I had my feet up on the bench because I thought, I'm not putting them on the floor. Anyhow, this thing, I was like, wow, I just remember that. And another couple of I had a few more shifts also working for the stock prep, and I worked in the clay shed, which was located over by the sawmill, where myself and a regular beater room employee, our job was to shovel clay onto a conveyor belt that ran from the clay shed up into the stock prep in the old mill, because the clay was used mostly for number 3 paper machine to make Supertone for Los Angeles Times newspaper. So that was, it was a graveyard shift. We'd sit there, BS, have a smoke. It was cool, but you're out there by just the two of you in this little tower, little building over by the old sawmill. And I also worked on the clothing crew. I worked on the clothing crew both in the old mill, which is 1 to 4 paper machines, and also the new mill, which were 5 to 8 paper machines, on day shift. Mostly the clothing crew's regular shift was only day shift. And you did clean up around the machines and in the basement. It was paper and that, and you just did general cleanup. And then a few times I got to assist them with putting on new Ford Near wires or felts on the paper machines on a maintenance day. But during all this time, between all these jobs, seems like a lot, but I mean, over the summer in different shifts. And while I was still attending high school, I was giving shifts on the paper machines. And as I said, at that time, there were 9 paper machines running, along with the Kmir machine, which turned out sheets of sulfite pulp. And I had shifts on 1 to 8 machines during this period. I worked at every one of those machines. And I really enjoyed working on the machines. You were with a crew. You weren't sort of by yourself in the basement with rats, or in the basement of a sawmill, like, that kind of stuff. Because first of all, the job paid better than base rate, because unless you were on 1 and 2 paper machines as a broke hustler, you got a little bit more money. And of course, the bigger and the faster the machines, the more you got paid. You were also not working in the outside elements. You were in a cozy atmosphere, which sometimes got a little too cozy, and a little too warm, but at least you were out of the elements. And there was also shift differential, because you worked the 3 shifts, day shift, afternoons, and graveyard. But I enjoyed the atmosphere in the machine rooms, and all of the crews on each shift. They all seemed to get along. They did things on their days off. We used to go on fishing derbies. There was hockey games. We'd pick up hockey games in the old arena, or picking brush. It was these kind of things that guys did. And it just seemed there was more camaraderie. And we'd also go for a beer in the Rodmay after 4 to 12. We'd always get together to do that. And I think I was also more inclined towards the machine rooms because my great uncle had worked there for 48 years. He started in the mill when it first started going out, and he retired as assistant paper mill superintendent. And all the guys knew him. That everybody I taught, oh, you're Gus's great nephew, and that he was my grandmother's brother, and he was just a great guy. And they all spoke highly of him. He was just a really nice person. And I guess I sort of wanted to follow him when working on the machines.